Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Hope you're having a good Tuesday. We're going to jump right in. Music fact of the day: Mariah Carey insured her legs and her vocal cords for $35 million each, totaling $70 million altogether. There you go. Bryan Kohberger, he's going to be back in court on Friday for a hearing. He's trying to get the indictment dismissed. His attorneys say that the grand jury that indicted Kohberger were misled as to the standard of proof required for an indictment. You guys have always heard that saying, right? That a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. The bar is very low. His attorney, Ann Taylor, said the state botched the jury selection process by limiting the number of prospective jurors brought in for jury selection. She wants the proceedings stayed until this can be investigated further. They had previously asked for this case to be stayed during the summer of this year, and it was turned down by the courts. Now, when they first asked for the grand jury indictment to be dismissed, apparently the defense had not even seen the grand jury materials at that point. His attorney says further, other irregularity exists within the grand jury process, and further investigation is necessary to determine the impact, if any, in the convening of this grand jury. The defense alleges individual juror bias or statements made by the court during the grand jury selection process. The prosecution said that Idaho's jury selection rule does not address those issues, so they would not work as a basis for the defense argument, saying raising allegations of technical violations without ever explaining how any reached the substantial standards set forth in Idaho's jury selection process statute. They also say the reasons Kohberger's attorneys gave were outside the scope of the statute, or they were misreading the statute. The defense also claims there was a clerical error with missing numerical information missing at the top of the jury questionnaire page. The state says that clerical information is not required by Idaho law. The defense also claims that one box checked by one of the grand jurors was that they do not comprehend English. So the state responded by saying if someone can't understand English, that indeed disqualifies them from sitting on a grand jury. However, the juror was presumably able to otherwise complete the questionnaire form entirely in English and to participate in the grand jury proceedings, which shows a mistaken stroke of the pen that merely checked the wrong box of a lengthy form rather than a language barrier. Another issue brought up by the defense is on the questionnaire, one of the grand jurors indicated they were a prior criminal defendant, but the state says that being a prior criminal defendant does not preclude someone from sitting in on a grand jury. Only those with felonies are disqualified. The defense points out that one grand juror did not mark whether they were a prior criminal defendant and didn't affirm that they were being truthful with their responses on the questionnaire and didn't submit a complete questionnaire, and that would violate the act. In return, the state says that even if the jury commissioner failed to conduct the ministerial task of sending the questionnaire out a second time, it still did not rise to a level of substantial failure to comply with the statute. In the filing, the state says that Kohberger has delivered on his promised strategy. He seeks a stay to buy more time to challenge the indictment in this case, saying the court should decline to indulge the defendant's already stated intention to buy more time to engage in various litigation strategies. This motion, like his last, should be denied. Seems like a Hail Mary move, but I will bring you the results of that on Friday. Moving on to Rachel Morin. Sheriff Jeffrey Galler has made some statements about the investigation, saying that one question we have continued to get centers around whether we have interviewed the boyfriend in this case. The answer is yes, we have, along with many other people who were close to Rachel. Colonel William Davis for the sheriff's office said that certain people out there are communicating about possible injuries to her and that they're not true. The man who spoke publicly, his father is saying that his son is not lying and that he was with a group of people who found Rachel's body, although he was not the one to actually find it. He said his son will not say anything further. Good choice, dude. Just keep it shut. Colonel Davis was also on court TV today, and he said they have 10 detectives on this case who are working around the clock. They've gotten over 200 tips, and their detectives are feeling encouraged with some of the tips. They're asking for people who were on the trail even in the weeks before the murder and maybe saw someone suspicious to call or email. She was actually found off the trail in a wooded area, and he said the boyfriend has been very cooperative and willing to talk anytime they ask, but he also said they're not ruling out anyone as a suspect at this time. He did say it was a violent attack, and they have stepped up patrol on that trail with multiple deputies on foot, four-wheelers, gators, which are kind of like off-road four-wheelers. They can handle a little bit more of a rough terrain. And also they're on bike patrol. There are lots of people still using this trail after the murders, and they just want to ensure the safety of those people. Rachel owned her own cleaning business, and one of her clients is speaking out saying that Rachel was warm, easygoing, always in a good mood, and above all, she loved her children, and that her children were very well behaved and good kids, saying she raised them very well. She had a flexible work schedule that allowed her to make sure her kids were always taken care of. We were like grandparents to the kids. She did say that Rachel seemed distracted the week before her murder. Let's just hope that this person is caught very soon. They're very dangerous, whether they know her or not. I just can't imagine what her family is feeling right now, having to deal with the fact that whoever did this to her is still out there. So fingers crossed we get some resolution in the case and tips. If anybody listening has a tip or knows somebody who might, the number is 410-836-5430, or you can email tips, rmtips@hartfordsheriff.org. So we're going to move on. I've been getting some answers to some of the questions that you guys have asked my contact in prison, and she's done a really cool thing. She's kind of made this a little job for herself. So she's going around and asking other prisoners about their experience. So we're getting a little bit more of a multiple angle view. That's always interesting to get everybody's perspective because, there could be 50 of us in a room and doing the same thing and all have a very different experience. So I like the fact that she's branched out and asked some people to contribute. I'm hoping to have a video conference with several of these women here soon and ask some more questions. So keep them coming. I'm going to pin those posts to the top of my social media profile. You can always send an email, gg@prettyliesandalibis.net with your question. This could be something that we do for a little while here and there when things are slow. But someone asked, what advice would you give to a newbie? And she said, observe first. Listen twice as much as you speak and don't get involved if it doesn't involve you. Somebody asked, how do you avoid conflict in prison? And she said, there is no real way not to have conflict. People love to poke at newbies to determine if they are prey. Someone asked, how do you deal with depression in prison? My contact asked around. Here are some of the replies. I'm going to give ages and how long they've been in. The first person to answer is a 75-year-old who spent 38 years on death row. She uses her deep Catholic faith to battle depression. She prays, says the rosary, prays to God, the Holy Spirit, and the Mother Mary. 32-year-old woman who has been in for 10 years of a 13-year sentence says she uses physical exercise, walks a few miles a day, and occasionally runs. She works out with medicine balls doing squats. Someone asked about men and women who date or marry people who are incarcerated for life. A 75-year-old that was on death row said if they knew each other prior to arrest, then hey, that's cool. If someone is just into lifers, well, there must be something wrong with them. They are desperate or they like the idea of their partner in a box where it's safe. They get family visits a few times a year. She said it seems like these people, these men and women who marry people who are incarcerated for life have control issues. A 61-year-old who has been here a few times and her most current sentence is 6 years. She said it's a fetish, but it is romantic. So there you go. 48-year-old woman who has life without parole. I think all the answers are true, but sometimes there are people who are overly sympathized with people cut off from the world. When there is a lot of communication, it becomes intimate. Prisoners are often seen as people with years and decades of pinned up sexual frustration. It's not seen as risky because the person is locked up. If you consider the prisoner's dark side or danger or what choosing a mate they cannot build a life with says about themselves. Another question from a listener, how do you reconcile life in prison? She spoke to several people who have life without parole and also two that have come from death row back into general population. You cannot reconcile the idea of prison being the rest of your life. Even the most negative of the bunch agreed that you must live each day with the hope of making it out while alive. Two of the ladies from the row have been down 38 years and still cling to hope of freedom, the row being death row. By the way, four ladies from death row who have been down over 35 years were not the actual killers in their case. Currently, relief laws would allow them to sentence reductions if the CDCR would recommend it, but the department policy states that such referrals will not be given for life without parole or death inmates. They all agreed that thoughts can turn to regrets, but all agree they try to focus on the present day and not the past. They all agreed that thoughts can turn into regrets, but all agree that they try to focus on the present day and not their past. One phrase used by one of the inmates was, glance at the past to ensure progress, but don't look too long or you'll get stuck. Somebody asked, how do drugs get smuggled into prison? And they asked, is it from visitors or corrections officers? And she said, most illegal substances come neither from visitors or correctional staff. It comes from free world staff and new arrivals. If a visitor sneaks anything in, it's due to negligence or compliance of monitors. New arrivals bring in enough, and then sometimes staff get seduced or blackmailed into bringing in the stuff. Somebody asked about the tablets and what do you mainly use them for? Everyone agreed tablets are primarily used for text messaging, then phone, then movies and music. Very few use the education apps, the rehabilitation apps, podcast apps, law, or other apps. Somebody asked about celebrating holidays or birthdays inside, and every one of the people she talked to said the best part of doing that is the people and the food, and they do try to celebrate major holidays and birthdays. She asked people about traditions that they had, but very few had any constant traditions that they follow on a yearly basis. The most common form of violence, somebody asked, what is your biggest fear? What is your biggest vulnerable point? Again, this was unanimous, and that was verbal abuse. Women have vicious tongues and know how to tear down another woman. Next was physical, but mostly we only see the bruises. The actual violence is quick and secret, just like when people get cut up. The one thing that's not so bad is good people when you can find them. When asked about friends on the inside, she said they could not agree on friendships. Those here over 30 years say, yes, there are friendships, but who they claimed as friends is not what I consider healthy friendships. This place breeds codependency. I myself believe it depends on your definition of friends. Since most of us lost 90% of our friends when we were arrested, it's easy to be content with temporary or incremental friendships. People claim friendship, but they last only as long as the situation, the roommate, the coworker, having a group together, or being in the same unit, same cell, that kind of thing. I've seen so many relationships fall apart when one person moves. Most friendships stop when one is released. Sadly, a lady here for almost 50 years had a roommate and best friend for over 20 years. When the best friend paroled, the one left behind never heard from her again. Recently, a network of former lifers are supposedly sticking together out there and advocating and supporting those still on the inside. But she said almost all disappear until they're sent here again as a prisoner. Then they want to act like they never left and just pick up the friendship where it left off, which is, I'm out. Don't talk to you for however long, and now I'm back, and let's be buddies. Most define friends as people you spend time with and who have your back. Showering being the most dangerous part of being inside and open to attack. They kind of elaborated on that a bit. Showers are not really danger zones for us because they are in this cell. Well, unless your roommate is the danger. Most vulnerable time for you is when you're asleep in your bunk. I've seen numerous times where the first punch is thrown against a person sleeping in the bed. My contact was sexually assaulted while laying asleep in her bunk. People have had hot water thrown on them in the bed. And the other vulnerable spot was on the way to school and work, but they finally added more cameras after a girl got cut up pretty bad. Most officers do not care if an inmate is being abused because their actions lead to nothing. Staff kind of has given up, according to her, on pursuing these things because the management to administration for the past 10 years have not supported the staff's attempt to enforce rule violations. Past leaders were fired for corruption and they protected the shenanigans going on. She said she spoke with many who have 10 to 40 years in, And they said to thrive, they need the ability to have a life. They are housed with 8 people to a cell. They are isolated from most technology, and we are assigned jobs and don't earn or compete for them. We don't learn any work ethics. We don't live any sort of independent life. We don't learn self accountability. To thrive, we need to learn to live as a community, to build something meaningful. We need to learn to live and not just exist. We all live this temporary way of life, but for some of us, it's not temporary. The most important thing this place needs is more and better staff. I wish I could visit every college campus and plead for psych majors, pre law, pre med, and others to consider committing 4 years to being a correctional officer. Bring new ideas, see the humans in the monsters, and then help them shed the monster. More staff means more opportunities for prisoner classes, programs, groups, etc. After those 4 years, those professionals would have a PhD in world experience and views. Maybe more compassionate about second chances, and future CEOs would hire felons. That was some of the things that she talked about and were important to her. We're still getting some more questions. Also, one thing I'm going to talk about is my contact actually gave birth while in prison. And there are some pretty scary statistics, which involves being pregnant and giving birth inside prison. It's horrific. So let's get into it. There is no mandatory standard of care for women who are incarcerated and pregnant. There are an estimated 58,000 women who are pregnant, admitted into jails and prisons every year, and thousands give birth or have outcomes while still incarcerated. Pregnancy rates among confined youth were similar to those among adults. In 2020, the American Prospect reported an average of 1,300 women gave birth every year while in jail or prison. So you got the 58,000 admitted, and then you have about 1,300. It's just because some of those people, obviously the bulk of the over 50,000 that are brought in pregnant, get out or get probation or have really light sentences that don't last the whole pregnancy. Over 2 million children have at least one parent who is incarcerated. That is staggering. The Sentencing Project says that more than 60% of the female incarcerated inmates in state prisons have a child under the age of 18. There is a documentary about prison nurseries. It's called Born Behind Bars. It's interesting. Some prisons have nurseries where women are allowed to keep their babies in jail and they are a part of a baby unit. In 2019, there were 11 states that had this type of setup. For the most part, the criteria to be allowed to do this is super, super strict. It's reserved for nonviolent, no felony holds, no escape attempts. For pregnant inmates, there may not be room for the program, or the facility just might not have it at all. The length of time the baby is allowed varies from 30 days to 6 years in these programs where they have these nurseries. Not all jails and prisons are capable of even accommodating women who are pregnant. Some go to community-based programs for prenatal checkups. Most go to local hospitals to deliver. A lot of pregnant women in jail say that they stay hungry. They're not usually given additional food to accommodate a growing baby. She said she stayed hungry the entire time she was pregnant in jail. She said the only good thing that she could say about being pregnant while incarcerated is that women who are addicted to drugs will not be able to get drugs as easily, although drugs in jails and prisons is a huge problem, and she has seen pregnant women get these. So prison slang term, I forgot to do that, on vacation means you're in solitary. So my contact found out she was pregnant after struggling for years to get pregnant. She was super scared to get too excited about her pregnancy. Once she finished that first trimester, she started working in the nursery. And once the pregnancy progressed, she started interviewing doulas, toured the hospital where she would give birth, and made her birthing plan. It was just normal pregnancy stuff that she was doing. When she was 6 months along, she was arrested for suspicion and non-cooperation. This was the first time that she had ever been arrested in her life. She said her faith in the justice system was strong, and she really thought she would be home before she delivered her child. She says she knew who committed the murder, and she naively believed it would be sorted out. She was placed in segregation for her safety. She kept waiting for a guard to come to her cell and tell her she was free to go. The stress of being in jail caused her to have to be seen a lot due to dehydration and decreased movement with the baby. The days turned into weeks, and she convinced herself that there was just a delay and she would be able to go home before she delivered. She said the screams and yelling really bothered her inside the jail, so she would put blankets over her belly to try to shield the sounds from her unborn child. And she would also frequently sing to her baby. The weeks turned into months, and emotionally, she broke. She said the hardest part was knowing the baby she had hoped for so long would be born to a jailhouse detainee. There would not be any special welcome. Her family would not be able to be there with her, and her birth plan had gone out the window. She couldn't post bail, so the plan became the sheriff's office plan for birth. She was told there would be minimal medical staff and 2 deputies present at her delivery. When she asked if a family member could be there, she was told that she was an inmate and policy would dictate how her delivery went. She was scheduled for a C-section. I cannot imagine having a C-section and having to go back to jail and sleep on these little thin cots that are like tiny, maybe an inch thick on a hard concrete slab. She said it was brutal. My C-section recoveries were brutal. It is a big surgery. And just 48 hours later to have to go back to jail and be in there is terrible. But I get she was arrested and had those charges. For me, it's just hard to imagine 2 days after a C-section, you're going to sleep essentially on a concrete bed with a mattress that's maybe 2 inches thick if you're lucky. To go to the hospital, she was cuffed and shackled with leg irons. She had arranged for someone to take her baby home once she was discharged from the hospital. She didn't want the baby to go into foster care, and her hope was that the legal situation would get sorted and then she would reunite with her newborn shortly, but this would never happen. Most of the staff at the hospital tried to make her comfortable. The most supportive was the hospital doula. And we know a doula is somebody who provides physical and emotional support during the delivery process. The doula held up photos of her loved ones so she could see familiar faces as she got ready to go in for her C-section. And also, she took photos. When it was time to go back into the operating room, she was unchained from the bed, and then her ankles were chained to the wheelchair to get wheeled to the operating room. When the chains were removed to get her on to the operating room table, 2 guards were there just in case she tried to run. After this, she was given an epidural, and once they confirmed that she was numb, only then were the shackles removed from her legs. In 2018, the First Step Act prohibited the use of restraints on pregnant women held in federal prisons. In addition, at least 29 states have passed laws prohibiting this practice, though these laws are not always followed. She said when she heard her baby cry for the first time, she said it was almost like the baby was protesting the way she was brought into the world. She was allowed to hold her for a few minutes, and then the baby was taken away from her. The baby had to stay in NICU, and when she was taken to see the baby, she was shackled to the wheelchair. Once she was there, the shackles were removed from the wheelchair, and then she was shackled at the ankles. Not all women get to stay with their babies in NICU. Some are discharged 24 to 48 hours later, depending on how you delivered. She remembers shuffling to the bassinet and hearing the clinking of the shackles. The other families in the NICU would stare at her and her shackles. She said each visit was super emotional because she didn't know when it would be her last visit. On average, for a natural birth, the hospital stay is around 24 hours. And the women have to say goodbye unless they're lucky enough to have a facility that allows you to bring your infant with you. While she was in her room and wanting to visit the baby, she was super emotional because she wasn't free to go when she wanted. The deputy told her they wouldn't take her while she was upset because it wasn't fair to the other families in NICU to see her upset because her baby was healthy and their babies were not, and they weren't crying. She said while she had time with her baby, she would rock the baby and look into his eyes and wonder what color they may be. She felt staff didn't help her as much because she was an inmate. She did say that there was one nurse who was great with her and helped her bond with the baby as much as she could with the minimal time she had to do so. Out of the blue, they woke her up and told her she was being discharged, and that same day she would go back to jail. She had one more visit with her baby, and she said she rushed to memorize every detail. She said her belief in being released was the only way she was able to say goodbye. Once back in jail, she said her faith and her milk dried up. She did see her child for the first couple of years off and on, and after that, the visits just stopped. She said the worst part for her was when her son said mama, and then she realized she was talking about the legal custodian of the baby. Until her trial was over, her parental rights were suspended but not severed. If she was acquitted, she would have gotten custody of her child back. Her family tried to get custody of the baby, but the courts sided with the custodian and been raised by her for years now. She writes weekly letters to her child. She does not know if he gets them at all. She still dreams of being reunited with her son, and she has some appeals happening, but we both know that after 10 years, she's not going to get her daughter back, even in a best case scenario, if her sentence is reduced or anything like that. Just a reminder, she is in for murder. She did not physically murder somebody. It's kind of the situation where before you go in a car and you know there's going to be a robbery or something of that extent and somebody gets killed, you all get the charge. That's how it is. She did not physically murder anybody. Talked about discipline. A prisoner is observed by an officer and is confronted if they're doing something wrong. If the action is nonviolent, they're just notified that they will be receiving a write-up. If the action is violent, they are cuffed and taken to a holding cage. This is a tall cage with no seating. Once the person is deemed safe, they are allowed out. If they are deemed a danger, they are strip searched and taken to segregation. A write-up is delivered by an officer to the rule violator a few days later. If it's a low-level offense like missing work, they get a consulting write-up with no penalty until they accumulate 3 of the same kind of write-ups. A mid-range offense will be addressed in a hearing. Loss of privileges and loss of days you have earned off of your sentence as well. A serious offense will be sent to the local district attorney for review for possible additional charges. Each write-up add points against you, which determines your security levels. Security levels will determine housing, what facility you're at, and program options you have. They have zero tolerant units in prison. My contact is in the zero tolerance unit where they just don't tolerate any big drama, essentially. But as we've heard from her, prison drama has been constant. So it's on a low-key level, I'm sure, where it's not loud and obvious to everybody. But even on these zero tolerance units, it still happens. So that's kind of it for today. I wanted to get to some of those questions you have. I have probably 50 more submitted to her, but I like that she's going around and getting different opinions from people. As you can see with some of these, they do have different opinions about certain things. And anyway, so we're going to keep going on this until something happens in another case. But in the meantime, hope you guys have a great rest of your Tuesday. We will see you tomorrow.